When people talk about ancient America, Panama is usually left out of the story. It's treated like a passageway, not a place with history of its own. But archaeology tells a very different story. Long before Europeans arrived, central Panama was home to a complex indigenous society archaeologists call the Gran Coclé culture. This culture didn't appear overnight. It developed over more than 1,000 years, beginning at least around 1000 BCE. At first, the evidence is subtle. People built permanent settlements along rivers. They shaped the land with earthen platforms and raised ground to manage flooding. They controlled water, food, and territory. This is the foundation of organized society. By the first centuries AD, this culture becomes more complex. Pottery styles diversify. Leadership becomes inherited. Specialized crafts appear. And most importantly, metalworking begins. Not iron, not bronze, gold. By around 300 to 700 AD, people in central Panama were no longer just collecting gold. They were processing it, hammering, casting, and alloying it with copper and silver into a material known as tumbaga. This requires controlled heat, technical knowledge, and skilled specialists. That tells us something important. By the time gold appears in the archaeological record, the society producing it is already well established. Around 700 to 1200 AD, this culture reaches its peak. And that's when we see the site now known as Sitio Conte. Sitio Conte is not a city and not a temple. Archaeologists agree it is a royal burial ground. More than 40 elite graves were excavated along the Rio Grande de Coclé. These were carefully constructed pits, some containing a single individual, others containing dozens of people buried together. At the center of the richest graves was always one person, a ruler. These rulers were buried with extraordinary gold regalia, helmets, chest plates, arm and leg bands, and animal-shaped ornaments. Jaguars, crocodiles, birds of prey. These symbols weren't decoration. Across indigenous American cultures, these animals represent authority, warfare, and spiritual power. The individuals buried around the rulers were not random. Archaeologists and early Spanish accounts agree they were ritual sacrifices. Attendants and retainers meant to accompany the ruler in death. This is not tribal simplicity. This is state-level hierarchy. Nearby sites, especially El Caño, show the exact same burial system, symbolism, and social structure. This confirms Sitio Conte was part of a regional political network, not an isolated anomaly. Then comes 1513. When Spanish explorers crossed the Isthmus of Panama, they didn't encounter scattered villages. They encountered organized chiefdoms controlling land, rivers, and gold routes. One of these leaders was a chief known as Nata. Spanish chroniclers described Nata's people as dark-skinned and powerful, using the racial language of their time. This was before large-scale African slavery reached the region, meaning the people they described were indigenous to the land. In other words, when Europeans arrived, this society was already ancient. Spanish conquest dismantled it. Chiefs were executed. Gold was melted down and shipped to Europe. Burial grounds were looted. Over time, the history was simplified, reduced to tribes and cultures, stripping away the reality of kingship and political power. But the archaeological record didn't disappear. Sitio Conte still exists. El Caño still exists. The gold still exists, in museums around the world. And together, they tell a story most people were never taught. Panama was not empty. It was not waiting. It was already old. And long before European history reached this land, Panama already had rulers, and they were buried like kings.